Hello and welcome back to Stu Structures. We're here for video 10 in the series of building the Beanery, so stay tuned. In this part of this building of the Beanery, we're going to continue on with some of the roofs and the cornice work. We're going to go ahead and put plastic on the tower roof and get some of that set up. We're going to go ahead and work on the cornice work for underneath the tower. Underneath there's a lot of little tiny scrolled type of wood supports, and we're going to show you how I'm going to make those. I don't want to have to cut all those out of plastic or wood. It would just be too time consuming to do that. So I'm going to show you a process of which I'm going to go through to make all those, and hopefully we can get all that built up and see from there where we go to. So let's get started. The first thing we're actually going to work on is the plastic on top of the tower roof itself, and I'm just using that real thin sign, and I came back here and measured all of the widths and everything on the roof so I could lay this out on plastic. Then I marked the width here for the height from where it comes from the point down to the lower eave, and I'm just measuring now the width of that. It's going to be just a little longer. Now I measured an overlap at the bottom, that like I did on the other roof, that comes out past the gutter work. So I'm taking the point for my measurement on the plastic down to that point and letting it overlap onto that excess area at the bottom, so I make sure I have enough gap through all that. And then I'm just coming back here and cutting that plastic out. I only want to cut one piece to begin with because I want to check this on all four sides and make sure everything's going to work the way I think it's going to work. And here I'm checking it on the first side, and everything seems to fit very well. As I go around the roof here, I can see that some of them, the plastic that I cut is just a little bit slightly wide at the bottom for some of the sides, but it's not too small, so I know this piece will work for all those. So I go ahead and cut the other three sides, so I have a total of 4 pieces. Then I come back and just clean that paint of the writing off the back of the sign like I've showed in previous videos, to make sure that we get a good glue adherence between the plastic and the plastic of the tower piece itself. I don't want anything in between there that will reduce that, because I don't want it popping off on me. And I'm coming here and gluing on the first piece, putting glue on both sides, the plastic and the support beams down below, making sure I get a little on both surfaces fairly well. It's coming back because it seemed to dry real quick on the structure itself. And then putting this in place and working it around to where the plastic is about midway down those support beams on either side. And once I get it in place and it's set up for just a little bit, I start on the other side. Now this next one was just a hair wide, so I held it up against the structure and just marked it and split the difference on either side, and it's not more than a couple of hair wide, but I want to make sure I don't overlap that. We'll show you here in a minute. You can overcome that situation if you do, but and there's the second one glued on. Now, when I came to the third one here, I did have an issue with a little bit of an overlap. So here you can see just a piece of plastic that I glued onto that side of that support structure, so that I had enough of the plastic to actually glue to on the top part of that peak. I didn't want to run short, and with the third piece glued on, the fourth side has enough plastic on both of those plastic pieces going up that I've got a good surface to glue to, so I go ahead and glue on the fourth piece. And all the seams are really pretty tight. Once we put a standing piece of plastic on there for the standing metal where it would meet on there, it'll hide any joints there anyway. So we're going to proceed on with doing a little bit of the cornice work underneath, and I don't really have a good blow up or a good shot of all these little tiny supports underneath the tower cornice, but they're kind of an ornamental scrolling type of wood piece under there that supports that, with several layers of wood built in there. So to start with, what I'm going to do is just come back and put the basic layer of wood that's on the very bottom of all that onto this structure. The cornice work is actually going to protrude up a little higher than the plastic on the side of this building. Not that you'll really notice once all the wood's there, it covers up any difference there is anyway. So I'm just coming back here. I measured on the plastic about how wide I wanted that wood to be. Then I'm coming back on this other piece of balsa wood here and just measuring those out. I want to cut a couple of strips so that I have enough to wrap around the four sides of that tower. So I'm just coming back with my knife here and making several scores. This is balsa wood, so it, you know, 2 or 3 slices and it goes completely through with a fairly clean cut. Once again, I am using a very sharp blade, but just getting 2 of these ready to go so I can wrap that whole corner. Once they're cut, I come back here with my regular tester's glue. I just put a little bit on the opposite sides, kind of smooth it out with my finger so that there's no bumps, and use whatever's left on my finger just to put on the back side of the wood piece. Then I'm just mounting this on there, keeping the end very flush with the plastic on this one end and letting the other end run by, and on the very top side just keeping that top edge even with the plastic. And putting 4 clamps on here so it can go ahead and set up, and then just repeating the same process basically for this second side. And once those are on there and have adhered and the glue is dry, I'm just coming back here and cutting them off even with where the brick was, because I want to let these next 2 sides that I put on overlap those ends so that it looks like the wood totally wraps the corner and I don't have to cut 45s on them. Once it's painted, you won't notice the joints anyway. And if there's a little bit of a joint, I can always use more of that green stuff to fill any slight little tiny holes or anything in there before I paint, and it really won't make a difference. So with the 2 pieces that I cut off, there's plenty length there to go ahead and glue both of these other 2 sides on there. Once again, I'm just keeping the one side really flush with the other piece of wood, and I'm letting the other side just run by for right now, and then clamping them into place so they can go ahead and set up and dry for me. Just trying to keep that top edge there flush with the plastic. And with 3 clamps on there, once I get it all set up and take off, here you can see that it's just the beginnings of the next cornice piece, just that very first piece. Now once again, I'm just going to show you this picture because there's quite a few of these little supports underneath the cornice up there. I've never tried to do this before, but I'm going to make these in a different manner. So I came up with a drawing, and this is kind of blown up and it's not the best in focus, but this is about what the cornice piece looks like. So what I'm going to do is take this sculpt putty and make some of these. So what I'm going to do is make one, and then make molds from that one to cast all the rest of them, so I'm not having to sculpt out tons of them. So this is the piece once I've got it sculpted out. Right here it's still soft and hasn't been heated up. You have to bake these at 275 degrees for about 12 minutes or so. And then I use this blue stuff to come back and make the molds. This is something that you dip into hot water, and after a couple of minutes it gets really soft and pliable. Then you put your mold piece in there and get a nice mold, and then it gets hard again, and then you can use it to go ahead and 2-part epoxy or whatever resins that you're using to mold, you can fill up the molds then and get your individual pieces. So I'm just going to make a bunch of molds for that little piece out of that same one that I baked, and make a bunch of them. So here what I'm going to do is just take each of these sticks and cut them in half, because for the tiny pieces that I want to make molds of, I think a half a stick will probably work for each one, and I have one masterpiece to make each mold out of, so I'll just do them all individually. So I heat the water up on the stove and put this piece in there to get soft and pliable so I can press the piece down in it. I did find out you might as well just leave your pot at the stove and work at the stove. The water cools down too fast. But then I just press the master down into it, and here you can see the master. I did work with the edges around them because these tiny little indentations in it. I just kind of pushed it up in a little bit. but I think the mold was good. And I'm going to try this clear polyester casting resin. I got this on sale at Hobby Lobby and have never used it yet, so I thought this would be a good chance to do that. And I'm making 5 at a time, so I don't really need a whole lot of resin down in here, so I just put a little bit in the bottom and put a couple of drops of hardener in there. And it says to stir for about 60 seconds, trying to make sure here I don't get any oxygen or air bubbles down in it, because I want a fairly clean casting. And then just using my stick and dribbling little bits of it and working it into the corners of the mold and everything, making sure there's no air bubbles left in the mold either, and getting plenty of resin down in there. Now I do leave it slightly mounded up, because this is going to shrink just a little bit as it sets up down in here, and I don't want it to be concave. And several hours later I come back and demold those and start the whole process again. Now there was a little bit of flashing that overlapped the top edge, so I just came back with an X-Acto knife and turned the flashing side down and just cleaned up that edge a little bit, and most of these turned out really well. So we're waiting for the next ones to set up. We're going to come back here and do another little chore. I want to go ahead and fill in some of these cracks on the edge of this building where the plastic in the corners meeted. So I'm going to take this 91% isopropyl alcohol on a real stiff brush and just come back and clean all those joints, because I've got oil from my fingers on this plastic and just who knows what all's on this, and I want the paint to adhere to the surface really well. So I'm just cleaning off anything that really could kind of keep that from happening, and just hitting every single joint on the plastic where I'm going to be working the paint here initially. And then I come back with a flat brush and just put a little bit of paint at a time on the edge of my brush and back drag the paint down into the cracks. Now it can, if there's any excess or any, I just back drag it onto the wall, because I'm going to be coming back and painting the walls the same color later on anyway. So it doesn't matter if there's a little excess. And basically I'm going to have to probably go around this building once or twice, at least maybe a third time, just to get all these cracks filled up, because it is going to reduce as it dries. So you may get a slight concave area the second time, or even a third time, that you have to come back and back drag the paint into the corners like this. Now, these cracks weren't real bad, but I didn't really want them to show at all. And you can see here, once I've done that, really most all the cracks are gone. If there's any other tiny little indication that there were some there, by the time I come back and put paint on the whole entire wall, it'll help to hide all that and get rid of any little indentations that are left at that point. So I'm pleased with how this came to this point. And I went ahead and did both the two additional walls that we have built as well, and got the corners of those all done too. And I do the inside corners too, because even though they meet flush up, I want them to be really good and tight. So, and then on to another chore. All these buildings have little windowsills, so I came back and just cut a long strip and cut all these little windowsills, which are just slightly wider than the bottoms of the windows. And I came back, and here you can see I did go ahead and start painting some of the building with the first coat. So I scraped a little bit off, and some of the windows I remembered to leave the paint off of where they glued to the plastic. I also glued this long piece underneath the tower window that's kind of an open gap behind it. And went ahead and did these secondary walls as well. Just so now all the windowsills are done and in place. And on to another chore. I want to come back and paint the inside of this gutter a black color. Once you put the roof on it and paint the outside edges, I want it to show really well. So I just use this basic paint. I get any of the colors I use a lot of, black, whites, burnt sienna, some of those colors. I just buy in these big tubes because they're cheaper in the long run that way. And just come back and paint all that. I can come back and clean up the wood a little bit when I paint it with the other color, so it looks good as well. Okay, so we're at a stopping point. Once you get into the building to this point, or any building, you end up where you're heading in so many different directions. A lot of times it takes a while for glue to set up, or paint to set up, or in this case for some of the resin castings to set up. So while those things are doing, you're starting other areas of the building and working on other things, and it's to the point now where I'm probably working on about 6 or 7 different little tiny projects all at the same time. So in the next video, the building's going to start to come together really quickly now. There's a lot of things going on. There's some things, a couple minor things that I kind of didn't think about that we'll go into in the next video too, where I had to beef some things up and change my thinking a little bit on a couple things. But overall, I think we're doing really well with this. Like I said, it's going to start to come together really quick now, especially the end building. I'm not sure if we'll quite get it finished in the next video or not, at least the basic building without the weathering and all that. But it should be really close at least. But we're also starting to work on those next 2 walls for the next couple buildings back behind that building, and those are going to come together quick to the point where we can start turning those into more of a structure and not just 2 independent wall systems. So we'll have something to connect on to this end building, because we'll no longer have to go up inside and all that once we get the windows mounted and painted and some of that stuff done. Everything can start to be glued together. I'm not sure if we'll quite get to that point in the next video or whether it'll be the following video. Like I said, there's just tons of little things going on all at the same time right now. So anyway, it gets to be exciting when you start to see everything come together. I hope some of you out there are building buildings along and trying some things while we're going through this process. Hopefully I'm giving you some answers to maybe situations you have, or helping you out with some information. Just a lot of times I just make things up as I go on the fly sometimes, and some things like this casting, I've casted with other products before, but I've never used the blue stuff. I like the product. I think it's really nice. I think it would work better for larger pieces and not a lot of fine detail. But these little pieces, they're clean enough that I feel okay using them underneath the cornice work of the tower. And so anyway, I'm going to proceed with it and go with all that. We're going to have to use another different glue when we get into putting those on, because polyester resins don't glue well with anything that I'm currently been using to this point in the video. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next video. And another thing I do is I study a lot of local history in the county that I'm from, and over the years I've picked up tons of stuff, and I'm currently writing a book on the history of the Civil War in this county on kind of a day-by-day basis. The very first land battle was in Philippi, West Virginia, just a few miles from here, and a few miles from where this tower was in Grafton, West Virginia. And I just found out doing some research and reading some of the notes and stuff that I had. One resource said that the tower in this building, once the South removed themselves back down to Philippi, the Union Army gathered in Grafton, West Virginia from a couple of different directions, from Parkersburg and from Wheeling. They came in on 2 separate trains of the B&O and met there in the yard. And they kind of lived in the yard for a couple of days before the attack on Philippi. But this one reference said that Colonel Kelly and a couple of his other generals were actually in the top 3rd floor of that tower when they planned the attack on Philippi, West Virginia. So anyway, that's just a small piece of history. Then it takes part in this little building that I'm building from Grafton, West Virginia. I find that fascinating. General McClellan, who it was a fairly good size and reputable general during the war, was there at that meeting. And I don't know, it puts a little history, a little more something into what I'm doing than I had thought about before. So anyway, I want to thank you again for coming back and sharing this time with me. Like and share these videos with other people that you know that do model railroading. Hopefully they can learn something and start buildings of their own. If you have questions or anything, please comment below or ask questions. Sometimes I do these videos and I think, well, that's a common sense thing, and I don't really bring it up in the video. And a lot of times after I watch the videos, I think, well, you know, I wish I'd also said this or that or something else. And so there are things that I'm not including in the video. I don't mean not to. But they may be questions that you have. So if you have those questions, ask them below. I always try to reply to all the comments and questions that are in the videos, and do the best I can to do all that, and I'll help you any way that I can. So anyway, thanks again for sharing this and coming back and spending time with me on this video. please come back and hit the little red button down at the bottom, subscribe to the channel. It's a free service, and every time a video comes out, then you'll be notified, and you can go watch the next one in line and catch up on what's going on. And once again, happy model railroading.